Thank you for coming. First of all, I have to say that this is the first talk of this year in which the department is trying to put together research activities done in the department with external innovation activity and industrial activities. And for today, it's my pleasure to introduce Daria Mochly-Rosen. You can read a lot about her on this first slide. She is professor of chemical and systems biology, and she is also George Smith Professor for Translational Medicine at the Stanford University, where she founded more than 10 years ago the SPARK initiative, of which we spun out a node here in Pisa today. And she's leading a multidisciplinary lab in the field of pharmacology. And she also founded 3 companies still related to drug development. She has been chair of the department, senior associate dean of research, still at Stanford University. And she is also president and founder of the SPARK Global Initiative, which is a worldwide network of nodes that replicate the model she founded in Stanford for the SPARK. And today she will talk us about translating research from the bench to the bedside, and she will talk also as how the SPARK model works. Right? Thank you, Daria, for coming.
So I'm also half Italian, which doesn't qualify me to speak in Italian, as some of you have noticed already today. But it means that if you want to ask questions in Italian, I will understand them, but I won't be able to answer in Italian. Or at least, if you want to understand the answers, I better answer in English. So before I start, how many of you are in medicine or pharmacology or biology? Okay. And how many are in computer science? You are in trouble. So this is actually very unique and already illustrates something that is going to happen in Pisa that is very unique, where the core of translational activity is going to be placed between departments, but importantly, heavily laying on computational science. This is a great advantage that you have. I think that we all notice in biological sciences, very variety of fields, that we were very good in creating lists. The omics generated lists of genes, of proteins, of modifications, of biomarkers. But only you, that side of the room, and you, that does computer science, can actually make sense of that. So combining these 2 fields is a fantastic opportunity for all fields. And I also will allow, I hope, to quickly bring new therapies for humans. So I'm really, really happy that we are here. Okay, so let me start with first, my degree is in protein chemistry. And when I was in the dean's office, I was in charge of translational research in the medical school. So what is a protein chemist doing in translational research? So I'll tell you just a little bit about what brought me to start this program and why I was interested in doing translational research. And this picture, that is very old, is from 2004. You could see I was a bit younger. And I'm sitting down in a lobby of a very shabby hotel at the airport of Chicago, after finishing presentation to about this number of people that were starting clinical trial with a drug that was identical to the compound that was developed in my lab. And the reason why I'm sitting down is that I have to push the return button to activate the first clinical site. The first patient that would receive this drug intracoronary, in other words, inside the artery of the heart, after heart attack. And the reason why I was sitting down is that I felt like I'm going to have a heart attack. Because suddenly this work that we were doing for a long time translated to a patient and their family consenting to participate in it, physicians that are willing to use it, nurse coordinators and so on, a huge team that was willing to take the risk with me to see if it's going to work or not. And there was no experience that I had that was more humbling than that moment. And it also made me realize that there are many of us that would have liked to reach that point, but we really don't know how. So before I will tell you more about it, I want to tell you about how actually we managed to start a company. And I'm going to tell the story very briefly. So we developed this compound as a tool compound to make a point in basic research, which was that particular protein kinases, their function is mediated in great part by where they are in the cell, which makes a lot of sense. But unfortunately for me, when we brought forward this hypothesis, which is more than about 30 years ago, it was very much against the dogma. So to prove the hypothesis, we had to provide tools that will disrupt the location and will show that that will disrupt the function of that enzyme. And so we started to work with cells, even though, my comfort zone was protein chemistry. And then at one point, I was lucky enough to recruit a cardiologist to the lab, which taught us that actually trying to think about it in the context of heart attack, it would be a really useful way to demonstrate the validity of the theory. In other words, we were doing it to prove a point in basic research, not to develop a drug. But when we started to see the consequence of using this compound in animals and how effective it was given after heart attack in reducing infarct size and reducing heart failure incidence, we started to feel very motivated to start a company. Why start a company when pharma is all around us? Well, we tried to have pharma take it because I knew that I don't know anything about drug development, and I thought I'm not interested in it. I'm really interested in research, doing what I found out in the lab and following this interest. But no drug company was interested, even though we had patents on it, even though other researchers confirmed our data independently, even though we've done it in small animals like mouse and rats, and also in large animals, including pigs. There was still no interest. So that really eventually was the motivation to start a company, and I did it with one of my graduate students. So during this time that I started the company, I realized what tremendous gap lies between what we found in the lab and what needs to be done in order to get to that moment where I push the return button to activate the first site. And how different is the way drug development works relative to our basic research. This gap between academic discoveries and eventually getting into a drug that the pharmaceutical industry distributes was termed the valley of death. In other words, that's where all the ideas fall down and die. And yet we in academia are really motivated by the possibilities that our discoveries are going to benefit humanities. After all, we are given money to do our research from the public. And we do have this aspiration that our work will eventually benefit society. So what are the reasons for this gap? I stayed with the company for the 8 years until it was acquired by Amgen, and another drug, not this drug, was eventually approved, and it's used is approved in Europe and in the US and in Japan. And all this time that I was traveling between the company and my lab, which at Stanford you're allowed to do 1 day a week, non-academic work, I kept thinking that this gap is due to two problems. And perhaps if we create a program that addresses it, we can really solve, at least in part, this gap. So the idea is the following. First and foremost, we in academia are absolutely, totally clueless about what needs to be done to take early discoveries and make them into drugs. We are not trained in it. We really don't understand what it is that needs to be done. And we are confused when pharma tells us, but it's not ready. Why isn't it ready? I cured the mouse. I even cured the rat. Why isn't it ready? What do you want more? Spending the time in industry really helped me figure out that there is a lot in it and that we do not teach it. There is a problem in not teaching it for two reasons. First of all, if we want our results to hit the patients, we really need to know what's missing and start to work on it. But perhaps more importantly, we are universities. We are educating students to jobs that they will not hold, because very few of these students are going to be faculty. There are very few positions like ours, and as I always say, we don't die and we do not retire. And so what are we doing with the students that we train to be us? We need to train them for other jobs, including important jobs in industry. And what we find now is that our graduates, the best of them, come to industry, and then the companies have to teach them everything from scratch because they were not prepared for these jobs. So it's our mission in education. The other reason why there is this gap is that there is lack of respect between the two cultures. So we in academia think that we are intellectual, that our work is a challenge, and we are discovering things. And industry is really mundane. They do one thing in front of the other. It's really not very creative. So we don't respect the kind of work that they do. And then industry look at us and they say, these people, you tell them, let's do this particular project, we agree on it, and you come after a week and they do completely different things. You cannot control them, people are not reliable, data are not reliable. So there is a total disrespect between the two cultures. There is somebody here from the industry that does this, so it means that I'm not speaking out of turn. Okay, so you have two groups of people, obviously very intelligent, and the issue is that they do not trust each other and they do not respect each other. So the simplest solution is to put them in one room. Because when you start to know individuals, of course, you change your mind. So that was the idea for Spark. And what we've done is we started with a very simple mission, which was to advance academic discoveries to better fit society through improving patient care. So the way we have done it is that we realize that we have to have industry people in the room together with the academician, together with a faculty member, not only students and postdocs. Notice that we want to have industry people, not industry, not companies, but actually individuals from companies that come and participate in this activity. But we also aim to have mixture of physician scientists and basic researchers, and in your case, also computer scientists. Because it's only through this collaboration that you can crack big problems like how to create new drugs for a disease for which there is no cure. So this mixture of culture is really essential. It's essential because it does one element that is the most enhancing element to forward a solution for a problem. And that is to make us uncomfortable. In other words, you have one foot in something that you really know a lot about, and the other foot in something that you don't know anything about. And this discomfort, this tension is really the juice for creativity. But also is a one that makes sure that you develop respect for the one who is in the field where your leg that is unsteady is placed. So you have an opportunity to be an expert in one thing and teach, and be a total student in another field and be taught. And this is how you start to create mutual respect. So it has to be in one room with people from multiple disciplines working together towards solution of translational research. So as I said, it was important to have the industry people in the room as individuals but not as companies. And the reason for that is that you're developing new ideas. Maybe there is no patent for it, or maybe there is a patent for it, but it's not yet published. And so if the individuals come as industry representative, they hear the ideas, that you can no longer patent it because it's a public disclosure. So it's important that they come in under confidentiality agreement. The purpose of that is not so that you go after industry because they broke the confidentiality agreement and they're competing with you. Good luck with that one for academia. The purpose is just the legal purpose, to protect the intellectual property. But also every student, postdoc, and faculty member that walks into the room also sign the confidentiality agreement. As a reminder, this is not your usual seminar where you go out and say, oh, I heard this terrific thing and so is doing that. No, What's discussed in the room stays in the room. So here is what our mission was. First of all, we've declared that our mission is education. In fact, when our dean asked me, why are you starting Spark, I said education. Why education? Because I knew that I need to deliver something. And I knew that when you put people in a room and you talk about something, you educate, so nobody will say the program is not working. So that's the only thing I promised Spark will deliver. But of course, what I wanted is to advance promising discoveries to make them into drugs, except I never said it until the program was already on for about 2 or 3 years. And finally, drug development is the most inefficient, most expensive, and most with the highest failure rate than anything else in industry. There is nothing comparable to that. And the reason for that is industry has to be risk averse, in part because it becomes more and more expensive. You have to be more and more cautious. We in academia are never rewarded for doing something that somebody else has done before. You can't publish it, you don't get promoted for that. You have to do something no one has done before. In other words, by nature, we are risk-taking. So you take these two culture of risk-averse industry together with risk-taking culture of academia, and you may create new paths, new way to develop the drug, or new way to tackle the problem that you are trying to tackle together. So it's very important that we are also trying to develop new methods to shorten the process of drug discovery and development. And also we have an opportunity as academicians to talk to, for example, regulatory groups like EMA, and convince them that perhaps clinical trial for diabetes doesn't require 20,000 patients as the last failure in clinical trial in diabetes cost. 20,000 patients is $2 billion. It's just unbelievable amount of money. In fact, it's probably more like $10 billion if you count also the salaries of everybody and the cost of operation for them. So really, we can go and talk to the FDA about biomarker-based clinical trial because we are in academia and we don't stand to earn money from it. And the FDA will talk to us about creative solutions for clinical trial. They won't talk to pharma because they are worried that this is for profit. All right, so the idea was to mix scientists from both areas so that we will start to develop respect for each other, but also to share knowledge. So when you are starting a company, you have very little money, so you ask one advisor in formulation and one advisor in medicinal chemistry, one advisor in clinical trial design, and so on. And that advisor, you pay a lot of money and you follow their advice because you already paid the money. But if you have an advisor that gives you a bad advice, they can derail your program. The only way that we will do better in academia is if we have 10 advisors on medicinal chemistry, or 3 advisors on regulatory affairs, or 5 advisors on clinical trial design. What you have then is each of them will speak about what they think we should be doing. And then you end up having a discussion about their experience, what worked, what didn't work. In the past, what projects have failed as a result of that. And then you have other people who've been around the block multiple times, executives from drug companies, who can also share their experience. So now you have multiple options of how to move forward based on real life experience. Now, of course, you face a problem that there are multiple opinions, and so how do you decide what to do next? So this is how a room looks like. It's actually semicircle, and this is the largest semicircle room that we have in Stanford. And it's important this semicircle so that it won't be frontal. In fact, everybody at the same, more or less the same level. In fact, the speaker is below the people who sits, like in Bologna in the anatomy room. And here, for example, in this corner, half person is 10 coins. 10 coin is from the Cohen-Boyer patent, the patent that actually made the biotech industry. He is a faculty member, very cherished faculty member in genetics at Stanford, and he came to Spark for 2 programs, so 4 years he was in Spark. He came every Wednesday night, which is the night that we meet. We have other people in this room, but what I want to also point out that we have multiple advisors intermixed with students. So this is an advisor, but this is a student. This is an advisor, young person, a student. This is a faculty that made antibody therapeutics that are actually used in the market, and so on. This is a Nobel laureate, and so on. So we have really a mixture of faculty, students, and advisors sitting in the same room and coming again and again to these meetings. One room and on university campus is another element. So this is not an incubator where you take a great inventor and a great idea, put it outside the university, bring the advisor around, teach them how to do it right, and then they move to the next company, and then you take to their company, and then you take the next one. If you do that structure, all the learning stays within the one person or few that learned. But if you do it on campus, you educate the educator, you educate us. And so the next time it happens, you are better at it. And importantly, you are also teaching your own students the things that you've learned. And then no hierarchy. No hierarchy is really important because it's possible that one of the young people who is a medicinal chemist has a better idea than a very advanced professor that is not a geneticist. You have to have no hierarchy, and importantly, you should not aim to reach consensus. In fact, if you think about why industry is failing in part, it has to do with the fact that consensus is a must. Every time a program is discussed to move to the next step, the way you do it is that you bring all the experts that are part of that program and you discuss it, and eventually you reach a consensus about what should be the next step, and you go forward. By nature, consensus in such a field means that you take the least risky path. And we know that it's not working. Otherwise, it wouldn't have cost, between $2 billion and $10 million to develop a drug. So what we are doing is we are putting up in the air multiple ideas. And then sometimes the faculty who is running the project will turn to me, for example, and say, so which of these proposals I should do? Which idea should I take? And the answer is simple. I don't know. If there was one solution, industry would have done it already. We don't know. So you take one of those that you like most, you try it for a while. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, then move to the next one. And we never say, oh, you made a bad choice. Because had we known what the one choice to do, we would have taken it. And I think that the most important thing about having people from industry coming and joining us every Wednesday night is that it's the first time, and in fact, in the only place where they can spend time sharing their experience when project failed. When project fails in industry, one of two things happens. Either the people who were working on these projects are gone, or they are moving to a new project. In both cases, it's not that they are mean or don't care about it. They don't have the possibility to publish what they learned from this failure. And by the way, industry is not very interested in teaching one company, teaching the other what to do better next time. But at Spark, we are all under confidentiality agreements, so they can share their learning with us, and they can contrast and compare between each other. And that sort of dynamic is making our progress better the next round and the next round. And they love it. So those are volunteers. They are not paid. And they have, some of them are coming every Wednesday night for years. Every other week we have a formal lecture. And then on the other week we have 4 projects that give a report on what they've done in the last quarter. The report is very brief about the science per se. So this is not a science lecture. This is, here is my invention. This is a kind of science that led me to that. Maybe 2 slides. Here is what I was planning to do last quarter. Here is what I've done this quarter. And here are the set of questions that I have for you to help me figure out what to do next, to give me advice about this and that problems. That's a major part of this discussion. So of course, the industry people love to come to that section because now they have an opportunity to teach and to discuss with other colleagues about this in an open fashion. But on the other week, on every other week, we have a lecture. It could be a medicinal chemistry lecture, or it could be informatics lecture, or it could be regulatory affair lecture. And one of the many advisors that we have will give the presentation. And then I ask the 9 others that are in the same field, why are you coming? Why are you coming now for the 5th year? And the answer is always because it is fun. What's fun about hearing what you know already? It's not that the lecture is frontal, but there is constant interruption. People are saying, oh, I think that, or in my company we've done so-and-so, and somebody raised their hand and said, I have a problem like this, what will you? It's very, very dynamic. It's a real conversation. And our meeting starts at 5:30, but around 3 o'clock, there is a coffee house right next door to the lecture hall. And when I go by, there are always multiple advisors sitting there. So those are people who have a day job. They come a bit early, and they come because it became a social club for them. They meet their colleagues, but they also meet us. So they can talk to us about scientific problems that they have as well. Because we became friends, and importantly, we became respectful of each other. We recognize the talents that each bring to the table, and that is why it works. This is the only thing that is needed for Spark to work. Some people, when we start Spark, would tell me, well, the problem with our area is that we don't have any industry. You guys are in the Silicon Valley, there is pharma around you, and everybody's entrepreneur. Not true, by the way, but doesn't matter. In our area, there is no industry. How can I find these volunteers? This is the easiest problem to address. If you were in a university with a medical school, law school, business school, computer science school, pharmacology, and so on, you have alumni. These alumni have been doing something over the years, oftentimes in industry. Just find them and tell them we want your help. And they love it. They love to be asked to be recognized by their own schools. And oftentimes they retire back close to where they went to school. So you can find them even if you are in University of Timbuktu, in the middle of nowhere. And we've shown it again and again. It works no matter, even if the whole country has no industry. Taiwan had no pharmaceutical industry, no biotech. And yet they found their advisors. So any place can find it, definitely Pisa. Okay, so we talked about some of our Sparky. Sparky is the titles that we give the faculties that are bringing a project to help mature for 2 years. So the one in the middle is Peter Kim. He was the president of Berk, and when he asked to join Spark, by the way, it's a competition. So we turned down most people that asked to join in because we don't have enough slots for that. So when he asked, I said to him, you were president of Merck. Well, why do you want to come to Spark? And he said, as you can imagine, I've seen everything from very high level. I don't know how it's done at the trenches. So his project is also in Spark. Okay, so when you develop a drug or when you develop a diagnostic, when you are searching the big data sets, you have to start with something in mind, something very definite. It shouldn't be an open-ended search. In the case of drug, when you're searching for a new drug, you have to start to think about not only what the drug is and what is it treating, but who is the patient, who is the physician, how the drug is going to be stored, what kind of characteristic it has to have. In other words, you have to start with the end in mind. That's counterintuitive for academia. We are explorer. We are exploring new territory. We are searching around and we find something interesting. We walk a particular path and something happens on the side. We move to the side and we continue to do research, and that's fine because we continue to produce knowledge, and that's what academic job is about, to produce new knowledge. But if you have in your mind a goal to also make drugs, you have to change that mindset and think about the end from the beginning. And so we provide incentive for that. We provide very little funding for the research and it's for the work, and it's not salaries. And we don't really give the money to the researcher. We actually hold it centrally and we provide it for particular milestones that we agreed on together with the researchers. We teach project management, which I won't go into, but it's part of science and translational research that people in academia are clueless about, but it's probably the most important things that function in order to make sure that project progresses properly. We talked about product development, focused education. The mentorship is by experts from industry. And of course, these projects eventually wants to move on to industry. So we provide also introduction to big pharma or to investors that want to help them start company. And we do teach entrepreneurship skill, although I have to say that this is my less favorite function, and because it's by itself a whole discipline. So we now set a separate course on entrepreneurship, and we do most of that in that setting. So how did we define our success? And that's another very important thing. You're lucky that your rector is here and he also believes in the program. Otherwise, I think he wouldn't sit here, or you've been paid for that. No, seriously, it's really very different when you start a Spark program and you have the leadership buying into the importance of that. But when you don't have this luxury, you have to think about what is it that you plan as a program to deliver. And it has to be only the things that are in the control of the program. So when we started a program in Taiwan, they promised the government that they will start biotech industry, will revive biotech industry. I said, don't promise it. You have no control over it. You can only promise that you will move things out, but you cannot say that you will build the industry. It may happen. It likely happened. In fact, it did happen. But if you are going to be judged by how many companies are going public or how many drugs are being approved, you're going to be called failure, because these things take a long time and not in your control. What is in our control? If we have an idea that until that moment that they joined Spark was not licensed to a startup or to existing company, or was not entering clinical studies, and now it is, that's a success. So this is one criteria of success that we are using. If it enters a clinical trial or has been licensed, that's it. Not if the drug was approved, not if the clinical trial were successful, not if it's now the company is public, not that. It did happen to us many times, but we on purpose don't even collect this data publicly. Of course, sometimes people tell us about it. One of the institutes that uses criteria added to it if the faculty got follow-on funds. That's something that oftentimes administration care about. And we do find that again and again, people who are in Spark, they get grants more readily because they know how to spin them in a way that is making it more fundable. Okay, so I will give you a few examples. How many minutes? 5? 10? Okay, so I'll give you some example. Let me skip this one. So this is Peter Santamaria. He's an ENT doctor, and he was practicing actually in Australia, and he was frustrated when he found children, Aboriginal children with perforated ear. He is an ENT doctor. He knows how to fix it. It's a very simple surgery. But he couldn't do it because he couldn't find the parents to get consent. So he had an idea, and the idea was, can I find a material that will, first of all, plug the hole, and also release slowly a compound, a growth factor, that will make the tympani close. Simple idea. He didn't have the growth factor, and he definitely didn't have the material. But that's what he came to us with. So we helped him actually figure out quite a lot of the things, made an introduction to people who had expertise in that, and he came up with a solution and tested it in animals, and he published a paper in 2015. One of our advisors, who is a serial CEO, heard this idea and he said, this could be really a great company. That's not what Peter was thinking about. He was just thinking, can we distribute it now in Australia and help with these Aboriginal kids? But what's amazing is this company was founded, and within few months, so in January of 2017, had a big deal with Big Pharma, with Astellas. Why? Because perforated tympani happens all over the world. And surgery is fine. But if you can do, instead of surgery, you could put a plug and you send the child home and don't have the anesthesia issue and so on, everybody's happy. So this is an example of a project where we started thinking that we'll just have a solution for this small group and ended up having a potential downfall for everybody. Not downfall. Now I can't even speak English, but anyhow, benefit for all. Yeah, let's skip that one. Let me tell you about this. Oh, you want that one? Okay. Okay. So by popular demand, I'm going to tell you this one. So this is Craig Garner. Craig Garner was in Spark 1. It didn't work. Then he joined again in Spark 3, and then the project worked. Now he's running Spark Berlin, and he's actually, our next Spark Global meeting is in Berlin. He's the host. So he found that in a model of a mouse of trisomy, providing a GABA-A inhibition help animal learn better and retain what they learn better. So here are just one data. So they teach the mouse to do something, and if they give the normal mice milk and ask them if they remember it. And if they give the animals that have trisomy, like a Down syndrome trisomy, they don't remember, okay? Now, he gives them a drug that is working on as a GABA-A receptor antagonist, and now they have the same sort of memory. And then 2 months later, these mice are not remembering as well as they started, but definitely with the drug, both the trisomy mice and the normal mice are remembering the same. Okay, so he had this data, but there are lots of problems, and we helped with quite a few things, including figure out when do you give the drug? So when do we consolidate memory? This is a question for the computer scientist. When do we consolidate memory? When we are awake or when we are asleep? When you learn something, do you learn it better by going to sleep right after you learned? 50% chance of being wrong. One of you will have to answer. Sleep, exactly. So mice are nocturnal, so we had to figure out that we have to give it to them during their sleep time or just before their sleep, and that's how they consolidate their memory. Anyhow, so we then started to figure out dose and dose rate, because these drugs also cause epilepsy, because this is a suppression, this is suppressive neurotransmitter, so if you inhibit inhibition, you get activation. We helped him find a CEO, and then he found a company, it's called Balance, and they just finished phase 2, I think now B, clinical trial, and I understand that it works very well. But here is an interesting story. When Craig Garner talks about that, he tells us how he was frustrated that he went with this data for treatment for Down syndrome patients, and Big Pharma told them they are not interested. It's not a disease. These kids are anyhow really disabled or young adults. And he said, no, look, if somebody has this disability and you manage to teach them, they develop really a very fast rate of Alzheimer-like symptoms, and they do not retain their memory well. So you can make them functional for a while, and then they lose this skill. This really matters. And this opportunity is really fantastic to help these children or these young adults. Nothing. When the company started the clinical studies, now 3 big pharma have an active program in this area. And by the way, I would say that not so much for Down syndrome, but it occurred to them that if it works in Down syndrome, and Down syndrome is an accelerated model of Alzheimer's disease, it might be an Alzheimer's disease drug. So when you ask Craig about that, he said he doesn't care if Balance will win or Big Pharma will win. He really cares that eventually there is going to be a treatment for this group of patients. And this is really an example, I hope, of many Spark projects where really the motivation is to do good, to have an impact on patient care. If there is money that comes from it, so be it. But really the goal is to move things forward. So maybe that will be the last story. I love this story. So this is a dermatologist, pediatric dermatologist, and he was taking care of this little girl that has lymphatic malformation. So I'm protein chemist, so for the computational scientist, this is something easy to figure out. The lymphatic system grows and grows and grows without control, and it pushes on inside organs on these children. It happens not very often, It's disfiguring. They look really weird. It's oftentimes in the neck area or in the cheek or in the torso. And it could be also life-threatening. This kid was really sick because she had a lot of pressure on her chest. And at one point, the team that was treating her, led by a vascular cardiologist, started to put her on sildenafil. This is an anti-erectile dysfunction drug. Do you call it sildenafil here? Well, anyhow, the blue drug, the Viagra. Okay. And because he was a dermatologist, he went to see her every day because her skin was very taut. And he started to notice that the skin becomes more and more relaxed, as though the mass is shrinking. You cannot remove this mass by surgery because it's very vascularized. You have to first really shrink it before you can cut into it. And he saw, for example, in this case now, this is another girl, but it's really shrank dramatically, it becomes very soft. So he went to the cardiovascular guy and said, wow, look at this effect. We need to do clinical trial. And the guy said, look, this is very rare disease, and it's really not my area of interest. This is a pediatric dermatologist. He was going nuts. He kept, really trying to convince somebody to do a proper study to see if it really works for more than one patient. So he came to Spark, and the first thing that we did is that we told him that to try to have a single case report. So he published it in New England Journal, talking about this one girl. Unfortunately, the girl on top, unfortunately died, but the other girl has done very well. So then we helped him get the drug from Pfizer, which, by the way, was a lot of effort, because we needed drug at a small dose for these children or these babies. And what we've done is crushing the drug and then putting it in something, and that's really not proper for proper clinical studies. You need proper dosage and formulation and reliability and so on. And so finally, Pfizer agreed to give us that. And then we wrote what is called investigative drug development, talking to the FDA, and they approved our clinical trial. And then he conducted an open label clinical trial and published it. And I'll just show you one thing with this. And this is another girl, and this girl was a bit older, and she had the mass in her cheek. She was very upset that she can't whistle. And after a few weeks of treatment, she could whistle. Now, this mass, untreated, will continue to grow. And if you think about removing it with surgery, you can imagine what kind of scar, but also it's very complicated to do that. So in this case, no one is going to make money. This is a very rare disease. But by publishing it, other children in other countries, Mexico, UK, are actually being treated with that. And if you go on YouTube, you'll find stories like that. The most important thing is that by doing a proper clinical study, you confirmed the efficacy and you motivated physicians to prescribe it. They can't prescribe a drug that is approved for one indication to another. But for physicians to actually use it, they need to have enough confidence that this is going to be okay, that it will work, and it will not be of any consequences to the children. So this is one of my favorite cases where we really made a difference for these kids. So I'm going to skip. And so I came to Italy without my power supply, just a computer. So I thought I had 3 days to prepare your talk, so I thought I'll do a big section on computer science and big data analysis and so on. So this is what I had with the very little batteries that I left on my computer. So obvious thing, I'm sure that you are all here because you think about those items. So computer science really made a revolution in drug discovery in multiple ways. First of all, the ability to start to think about how drug interacts with the target and doing in silico modeling. But there are other aspects, which is disease modeling. I think Pfizer was one of the first programs that were companies that started to use computer modeling for disease with the idea that it's multifactorial and you can use mathematics to figure out how or predict how disease will proceed and where you're going to interfere with most effectively. You can model side effects, but most importantly, as I said, we in biological science, various fields, are very good in creating lists. This omic attack, genomics, pharmacogenomics, and all those omics, metabolomics, and so on. So how do you make order in all these tons of data? Is through computer science. And finally, there is fantastic data mining by looking at text mining. So oftentimes, people will write a report on something and will write one line on, oh, by the way, when a patient is on an aspirin and on this drug, they have blue hair. Well, one person reports it in one case, and in another case, they will say their hair color changes. And in the third patient, they will say they have side effects that affect their, I don't know, appearance. With machine learning, you can figure out all these forms of calling things and eventually figure out that actually there are now 3 reports that talk about this connection. And now you have a hypothesis. A drug plus another drug is making people grow blue hair. It matters or it doesn't matter. And through this data analysis of text, there is fantastic opportunity to make discoveries that are really valuable. And I think that that's why we're looking at you with the hopes that you can enhance the process of drug discovery through mining this really gold mine of information that we are drowning in, literally drowning in. Okay, so why Spark works, here's the end. It's multiple opinion, it's on university campus, there is no hierarchy, it's ongoing. So people are committed to come every Wednesday night, and unless they are traveling, they come. And we learn from past failure, and I think this is an important component. So we started Spark 12 years ago, and now we have Spark on all continents, with the exception, as I mentioned this morning, Antarctica. And Italy is also on the map because Pisa, as this morning, is officially a Spark program. Now, what does it mean that we have Spark in all these places? Not every place uses this program in the same way. There are local accents, there are local languages, there are different challenges, there are different strengths. So there are flavors for the program, but there are certain elements that are identical. That you put people together in one room, that you put experts from industry and your faculty in one room, that you're doing it because you feel it's a social responsibility, and that you are having the patient in mind. You want to take your discovery and bring it to patients. But what is the opportunity in having a global Spark program? Of course, this is a connection between the Spark satellites. So if you have a new threat, like the Zika virus, I could call, in fact, I did call Brazil, the director in Sao Paulo, and I asked, do you have a Zika expert? Do you want us to help you with developing vaccine? And we were the first to work between various Spark sites on active vaccine for Zika virus. Or if you have another threat, like Ebola, you can connect various experts throughout the world. And there are all people that are now familiar with being translational research scientists, thinking about the end at the beginning and walking backward to where they are and closing the gap. So this is the end, and we do have a book, so it can be used as kind of an additional information to enhance the content of the program, but we share slides. We are happy to have you guys come and join us, look at these activities together. And the bottom line is, I felt like starting Spark was an important activity from my perspective for, to find more technologies that have utilities. I didn't think that it would be what it has become. And what it has become is the sum of the part is way bigger than the parts. And that's the most satisfying part of doing Spark. So I hope you'll Spark too. Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. Otherwise, I'll feel really bad.
Thank you, first of all, for the clarity of your exposition. I'm not a medical doctor, but I could follow almost anything. I'm a computer scientist, as you can imagine. I had interactions with, through some colleagues here. We had meetings with medical doctors, biochemistries. And I was curious on the organization of these meetings, because in our case, when you meet, you feel excited of the topics you want to work on. But as you know, we have a lot of duties: teaching, working with students, PhD students, postdocs, colleagues, so on and so far. So you get excited by the problems, the motivations. You were very optimistic in presenting us those challenges. But on the other hand, when you go back to your life, you have all these duties. So I'm curious, all these people, especially the advisor, they are probably top-level managers. They are not, I don't imagine them going back to work and thinking of those problems. They probably have to deal with their normal job life. So what is your experience? So this is the difficult part that I can see when you put together an ensemble, all those people. I don't know.
I totally agree that this is a person that wants to join Spark needs to realize that they are going to dedicate extra time in order to do it. So first of all, it has to be so that the motivation is sustainable. Something has to happen every week, because we are very impatient people. Every week something has to happen in order for them to come the next week and the next week. So that really is important. So these meetings have to be really dynamic, and maybe every week is too often, then you decide every 2 weeks, whatever. But then you're right. Okay, how do I take it back to the lab when I have all my other obligations? So I actually talked to your rector about it this morning, because it is a challenge everywhere. People are rewarded for functions that are not related to translational research, yet all the university says, oh, we have to do translational research. So there is a need to change some of that in order to enable researchers that are interested in translation to actually do that, by freeing some of their time, by giving them a bit more money, by rewarding them in way of promotion. Because if the university counts how many papers you have in order to promote you, and you actually have 10 inventions and it doesn't count, then you are in trouble writing patents instead of publishing papers. So I think that the system has to adapt, and if there is recognition by the leadership that this is worthwhile activity, it has to accommodate. But I also think that we all have to have what the Americans call skin in the game. In other words, it has to hurt a little bit. Because if it were easy, then we are not motivated to do it. We are really kind of people who are doing hard things because it's not easy. We like that. So I think having this tension is important. But I think the challenge, and it will be the challenge for Corrado, is to have these meetings really lively, that every time you leave the room, you say, okay, I didn't waste my time. Something good happened. And the something good happened can be on a week that you are not talking about your project, but you gave an idea to somebody else that is really enhancing it, or you heard something that now gives you a perspective about something else you're doing. Or you just see somebody who started with a project that was so early, and suddenly they are taking care of patients, and there is fantastic result, and you're just happy because you were part of it. So something has to happen.
Thank you.
I have a technical question. Sorry for that. I have a technical question. You mentioned modeling on one of your last slides. Was this a challenge for us in the sense of, I mean, what we do in computer science, we do a lot of modeling. We see things as processes and are describing them in various ways. Now, was this a challenge you wanted to offer us, or is it something which you have done already?
Okay, so the question is whether modeling is something that is already happening. It does happen, and I think Corrado can speak about it more fluently than I can, but I remember going to a drug discovery conference 15 years ago when GSK was, GSK was going around saying how they are modeling disease on computer, and then they do a spot checking to confirm that the model is working, so on, and everybody was saying, yeah, right, it's not working. I think a lot has changed. It's definitely working. The question is, who is feeding you the information, and how much interaction you have with the people who have the information to make sure that you are modeling the right things. And that's why it's essential that you do not model in vacuum. that you have clinician next to you, you have basic researcher next to you, and you check each other to make sure that the modeling is within reality realm, that it's not.
I mean, what you said, that's exactly what we are experiencing. And that's, I think, the big chance of putting people from different fields together, because you need a common language, common understanding of what you are trying to model on. Because we have our computer model. Whether that corresponds to what the reality is, that is the crucial issue, which you can solve only in talking together.
Yeah, let me give you two responses to this issue about how checking reality. So we are Department of Chemical and Systems Biology. So we have people who use a lot of modeling to explain basic biological processes. But they never finish with the model. The paper is always, and that gives me the idea that if I perturb the system this way, it should work that way. And then now I did the experiment and it worked. Now, if you are just computer scientists, you can't do that. You can only provide the model. So it has to be this interdisciplinary work. And the other thing is, oftentimes when I talk about translational research, I use Italian as an example. So, people think in other countries that Italian is such an easy language, Everybody knows what stupido is and what intelligente is. But when you ask what caldo is, some of them will say cold. My point is, when you're working in interdisciplinary field, the problem is not asking a question of the other person when they use a term that you don't know. The problem is when you assume you know the term, and actually you didn't, like caldo being cold. It's really the biggest challenge. So how do you collaborate, you, computer scientists, with a physician? Is by constantly repeating what the other said to them. So when they say caldo, you means it's going to make my skin prickle, or it's going to hurt me because it's hot. You confirm everything that they are saying, and only through this exchange you make sure that there is an understanding. And when there isn't, you are talking about what is it that you don't understand. So the problem of this translation research is huge. How do you communicate when you have no common terminology? And it only happens slowly, by constantly talking to each other. And I think if faculty is doing it, it's going to be a permanent change. If it's students that are doing, they learn and they leave. That's why I really encourage the faculty to participate in this exercise.
Other programs currently, or what's your vision for the future of this particular field?
Okay, so the question was whether we have other preparedness programs like that for global threats.
Yeah, or your view for the future.
So, yes, we do. So in Spark in Japan, our last Spark global meeting, I actually challenged the directors to think about projects that they want to work together. And so some obvious things were brought up, like malaria, infectious disease of global threat. And the one that is my favorite is radiation disease. Why radiation disease? Because we have some crazy people that are saying that they have bigger button than the other one. And because accidents happen from power plants, and because we have less and less ozone and we all get more radiation, so radiation disease. But think about it, this is a huge challenge. You want a drug for radiation disease that is never going to be used unless emergency occurs. So you could see exactly zero pharma going into this.
And that's why I asked.
But we can. And so the idea with radiation disease is that we are trying to find scientists that are interested in working on it, and we want to use existing drugs. Why existing drugs? Because they are existing, and so it will be easier to stockpile them, to keep them in large amounts, and use maybe combination of drugs. We're starting a program in radiation disease, and if you guys want to help fund it, I'll be very happy. This is really an example of no skin or big skin for big pharma, and doing really the right thing for society. I really believe that we can solve problems like that together better than individually. But it's a big challenge. You go to the Department of Radiology, or radiation oncology, and you ask them, how many of you are working on radiation disease? So everybody knows what radiation disease is. You get a lot of radiation, it ruins your stem cell, so you have no immune response, your hair falls, your skin burns, your GI is not working, your brain can be dysfunctional. Big problem, depending on the amount of radiation. So I went to radiation oncology department and asked, how many of you works on radiation disease? No hand. How many of you works on radiation that causes DNA damage to the chromosome? And suddenly you have like half of the room raising their hands. But this is radiation disease. It's just another name. So the challenge we have when we go around the world trying to find partners is, first of all, telling them that they're actually working on it. It's figuring out. Big challenge, but worthwhile. I'm very optimistic. We'll see in Berlin whether they accept it as the next global challenge for us.
Okay, thank you again, Daria, for this exciting talk.